am the Director of Undergraduate Admissions here at IUPUI, and over the last year was placed in the position of serving as the Principal Consultant for Enrollment Planning, focusing specifically on beginners. Now, I know in the plenary there were some really important points about having a diversification of enrollment pipelines, so it's important for me to say we certainly, and on my end, appreciate and value working with transfers and returning adults and the variety of different populations. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to focus specifically on a call to action from our cabinet leadership to reverse a downward trend of enrollment and do so in a way that corralled the campus, particularly here at IUPUI, where I'm from, a decentralized campus, and also identified high impact enrollment practices through the data within a pandemic context. Professor Hiram, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Errol Wint. I am a faculty and the graduate program director at Parent School of Citing.
Very good. So we're gonna go right in. So a little bit about myself before we get started today. I've been working in enrollment management for about 15 years now. I've been at IUPUI for 4 years. Stepped into my first directorship and within 1 year had the mighty task of reversing and reimagining the way that we approach the pipeline and ensure that we're optimizing our enrollment, retaining staff, and doing so through a lens of innovation. Welcome, come on in and have a seat. So to give you a sense of why this matters to me and why I care, during the first year in 2020, we saw a downward spike of our beginner enrollment of 17.5%. Then in 2021, we saw a downward spike of 5%. And then came the call to action from our campus leadership to turn the ship around, to really think about a new way of approaching this work. And I was thrilled to be able to partner with my faculty colleague, Dr. Young Bakong, to identify the concept of design thinking. And so as you can see in the title, we're going to be talking about design thinking as a function in a way of identifying high impact practices as well as addressing the great resignation and retaining and energizing your workforce to move in a direction where there can be success. So the first thing I want to take a moment to do is just acknowledge our leaders. Here at IUPUI, every leader at every university had the mighty task of really trying to think about how to approach this work in these particular times. And you've heard throughout this conference, these are absolutely unique times in higher education. And so at the top, we have our cabinet leaders, Dr. Paydar, who is now with the U.S. Department of Education, Dr. Kathy Johnson, Dr. Candy Broker, as well as Dr. Stephen Hunley, who many of you all have seen. But I'm showing this to just give you a sense of the diversity of buy-in that has to come with approaching such an unorthodox approach to enrollment planning. And then we have our colleagues in the Division of Enrollment Management. My former supervisor, Dr. Boyd Bradshaw. I want to acknowledge my new supervisor, Dr. PJ Woolston, who is here in the audience. 3 weeks now, Dr. Woolston? Yeah. So I'm incredibly grateful that he's here. This is one of the ways to kind of get a review of what we've been doing the last year. So I'm thankful. But we also had a couple of unique partners in our division. We did have a new team that was focused on strategy and insights within our division. Not common within the enrollment management world, but it definitely certainly helped us out. We had another individual that focused on staff retention and the organizational leadership work as a function of this. And then we had our senior associate directors that worked in the admissions office and otherwise. So just kudos to them, because again, we don't step into something as massive as this without visionary and supportive leadership like what we had here at IUPUI. So the first thing that I'm going to showcase is something that you all have seen, but I guess I would ask you all, what are some things that you all are seeing enrollment-wise on your campuses in terms of the challenges that you're hearing from your enrollment management professionals? Any of these particularly stand out, or is there something missing? The floor is open. Enrollment at your universities. Sure.
I would just say an overall concern for debt.
Yep.
The economic consequences.
Absolutely, affordability. I think Now more than ever with President Biden announcing the loan forgiveness and that being in progress right now. That's a good thing on one end, but in our world, it's shining an even higher light on that, the topic of affordability. What else? Anything else?
So we're experiencing a lot of barriers with students enrolling, such as financial as being one of them. And they want to see the benefit right now. And so how we structure our classes might be a Monday through Thursday class, and that they don't want to do that anymore. So that flexibility is becoming, the lack of our own flexibility in our course structures and course sequencing and offerings is actually a barrier for enrollment.
Yeah. So I'm hearing some modality is in there. I'm also hearing some generational, personality aspects. So, wanting things, right now, and I think there's an aspect of the human consequence as well that we're facing. Very good. Good thought.
Yeah, I realize a lot of the students that we're working with too are persisting toward a degree, and they're committed to it, but not on our timeline. They're not on the 4-year track with the 5 or 6 year backup. They're working, they've got family situations, so they're very much committed, but they're also very much thinking it's going to take me 8 or 9 or 10 years, and I'm okay with that. And we're not prepared to support that.
Yep. Very good point. Very good point about the diversity of tracks that the students that we're recruiting and looking to enroll on. Anything else?
It's not necessarily there are less students to recruit, it's difficulty finding the pockets of students with the preparation needed to enter into our programs alongside the desire, will, time, etc. right now to pursue that degree. And so helping them to see the value added of having a degree and what part-time looks like. My institution's part-time for my unit, so.
Very good. Very good.
We're also having to compete with our own partners. So for example, I'm in health sciences, and our enrollment is impacted by what prior to COVID, which we considered workforce partnerships, are now our competitors because they're doing on-the-job training, and we're having to compete for that because the Great Resignation taught everybody, including our own educators, that I can quit and go work somewhere else and basically write my own paycheck of where I want to work. Here's my salary point. And our employers are actually not wanting to wait for 2 years or 4 years to get somebody to fill that vital role, which is widening our gap.
Yeah.
Too. So.
That you've covered a lot, but covert market adjustments can fall into that. You're talking internal as well as external factors. But a lot of movement in terms of trying to recoup the enrollment imperative. Inside Higher Education did its annual survey, which is our primary publication, and many of you may follow it, of admissions directors. About 300 responded, 36% reported meeting their goals this past year in terms of their enrollment goals, right? So that's 64% of across the nation of individuals who are not meeting their enrollment goals, okay? And you also have, dare I say, the looming word, the enrollment cliffs, plural cliffs, right? In addition to the, these additional factors. But I want to really point out at the bottom here, these are gravity problems. So terms that I learned as a graduate student in Professor Hong's graduate certificate program for design thinking. And these are, by gravity problems, just like gravity, these are things that are going to happen. These aren't problems to be solved. They're facts that we need to live with. And we need to solve problems around the reality of these gravity problems. So now when we bring it into my world, all right? And I wanna, before I go into this, say to the audience, I said this individually, really excited to be presenting to you all today because I am a practitioner. You all are in the assessment and learning community, so I'm really excited to hear your feedback. That's why I'm here presenting today, because I want to improve this. I want you all to give affirmation, but I want you to tear it apart too, okay? All right, so first, in 2020, we in our world, in terms of recruiting, we shifted 100% remote, just like all of you all. But our our ability to access students was heavily compromised. We had to figure out ways to shift into a viable remote option. It wasn't always great. I think everybody was using Zoom. We saw emotional distress from our students in terms of loss of prom and graduation, but also from our workforce. We saw the lowest report of confidence in the ability to afford conversation out of all pandemic years in this particular year, according to the 2022 senior search results from Niche. 20,000 students that are seniors that were interviewed for this and are interviewed each year. And then oversaturation of communication, among other things, right? We knew what students how they wanted to be communicated with, and everybody knew that, and so there was this oversaturation. Then 2021 comes in, and in our world, we saw limitations to traditional recruitment practices, and new tactics then begin to emerge. Data now begins to lose the same level of fidelity that it used to have. So when somebody looks at my numbers and says, excuse me, Errol, Director of Admissions, whoa, the numbers are down, we need to do something. And we look at this time last year, what we're doing, 2021 and 2022 were completely different. So now our ability to make precise and thoughtful decisions is compromised because of no fault of any human being, but of the context that we're in. Lower confidence in academic readiness after e-learning, confusing landscape for test optional admissions. So we were lucky in terms of IUPUI to put a lot of legwork in getting test optional admissions off the ground, but there were a lot of schools that just said, you know what, X the standardized test, let's just hop right in. And across the board, students had different policies, so it was incredibly confusing, especially when you think about affordability being top of mind. Higher desire for in-person visits, lowest report of social and emotional readiness of all pandemic years, oversaturation of wider breadth of communication, and then affordability concerns expand. So I'm gonna show you a couple of charts, and again, this is from the 2022 senior search results from Niche. And the thing I want to really showcase about confidence, and if you can see 2020 is blue, orange is 21, and you have green, you see the academic preparedness goes down, then it goes up, okay, when we return back in person. We also see the affordability take a spike once we come to this return to normal. If you all recall, it's kind of things start to seem like they're normal, but then they're not. And it goes back down in this particular year in terms of perception. And then the social and emotional preparedness. We've all seen Generation Z, the worst mental health crisis ever right now. And it's showcasing where things were and then where things are at right now. So now you're talking about enrollment planning for a volatile customer base, student base, right? This is just talking about students, but you also have, I'll come back to the workforce. We talked about communication. As we talked about before, email is the preferred way. Everybody in the industry knows that, and so what happens? This is what the standard inbox of a prospective student looks like. If you can see at Virginia Wesleyan, University of Linz, UK, everybody is communicating. Students are saying they are overwhelmed. But we on our campuses, what do we do whenever there's problems and when the numbers are down? We have a proliferation of action. We need to do more. We need to do more. We need to do more. Do more of what? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today in terms of how we can define that through a design methodology. And then we have, who do students want to hear from? First time in my 15 years. Dr. Wilson, maybe this goes beyond for you as well. Financial aid staff at the top of the list, okay? Admissions counselors have traditionally and used to be there, but what does that tell us in terms of what people want to talk about? Affordability, money, how can we fund this experience? Current students, okay? This is another piece. Who are the best people to talk about the experience that they've had during the pandemic, through this period that is kind of tepid pandemic, right? And otherwise. And then you have professors as well, which is why I have my colleague here, because professors and faculty play a critical role in what it is that we're talking about here today. So in summary, when we talk about planning through volatility and understanding students and staff alike, we talked about students, but we're also seeing the great resignation, staff as well, seeing burnout, staff, seeing opportunity in ed adjacent industries, staff feeling like they're uncertain about how to go about optimizing their best talents in the work. And so we're seeing spiking confidence, overwhelmed with communication, uncertainty about affordability. Individualized facilitated support is higher desired, but may not always be accessible. Affirmation of quality, and then campus engagement and support experience. So, how might we statement? Now let's imagine a vision and a reality that we've never seen before, okay? So how might we establish more precision and data-informed decision-making around the recruitment experience? So what I'm looking for as a director of admissions, and what I'm hoping for from you all as assessment and learning professionals, is support and how we can be more efficient in saying, we know that spending time in this domain is going to really move us in the right direction. How might we increase analysis depth and decision-making, right? Quantitative data does a really important job of giving us a breadth of knowledge. But one of the things that I learned in my course work with Professor Hong is when you talk about qualitative data and approaching a mixed methods approach, you get a bit more depth in terms of where you need to be. How can we increase analysis depth and decision-making in terms of leveraging qualitative data? And then we have internal, right? So that this is talking about students. Now we've got our internal processes. So how do we establish buy-in to recursive cycles of prototyping, learning, and improvement in relation to planning? So a process where we're perpetually planning and deciding who is involved in that. Our traditional methodology, usually starts with the top, right? We're a very hierarchical entity in terms of higher education. What happened if we turned that on top of its head while still honoring the role that leaders play in finalizing and making decisions? And then inspiring a more engaged workforce with meaningful collaboration across faculty and staff lines, meaning the organizational health. If I can't pay you more, if I can't promise you promotion, how am I going to retain you in the midst of this great resignation? So I always say when I look at this and I think about my work, I could have the greatest, most highest impact practices in the world, the most fancy CRM, and the greatest vendors that are going to promise to do everything. If I do not have the people and if I do not have the talent, it means nothing. So enrollment management is now moving into a domain where we have to think about how we're retaining our best and our brightest in terms of talent. So the good thing is this isn't out of the air. We have models in the United States right now that are using design to determine the next steps of traversing the challenges at hand. If anybody knows who Dr. Michael Crow is, okay? It's a fantastic podcast interview that he did on the EAB office hours on June the 28th is when I believe it was. But he started in 2002, and through 2017, he increased his enrollment by 85% using the design methodology. During the pandemic, he saw an increase of 30% in freshman enrollment and 27% increase in diverse freshman enrollment. I'm going to read this quote. Designing public institutions to serve public interests in rapidly changing society justifies rethinking the organizational logics that dominate higher education. Arizona State's new logic, academic enterprise, that's what they're calling their approach, requires universities to turn their efforts from conserving resources towards maximizing them through careful investment, okay? So we have one model here. Well, maybe you're not at a large public. Let's take a look at a small private liberal arts institution, all right? During the pandemic, President Dr. David P. Haney extended his contract as a result of adopting design methodologies in his planning approach, using what you see here, results-based strategic design. We're on the first principle, recognizing that planners plan and designers solve problems. So the difference between strategic planning, okay, versus designing, okay? Shaping the product, which is the 4-year experience in a manner that we know our students are interested in, right? And creating that interest. Using constraints to encourage creativity, right? Gone are the days when we can throw things on the wall and see what sticks, okay? Boundaries, all right? How do we go about engaging that? Determine constituents' needs, which may not be what they say they need, right? So there's an understanding step, a data collection step. Engage in prototyping, okay? Resource the early adopters and let consensus follow later. So how do you connect dollars with strategies with a certain level of confidence and fidelity? And then finally, don't try to do everything, okay? Leave some white space in the calendar. That's really hard for us in our industry, right? You know, when we have back-to-back Zooms and wanting to do more because we have a culture and a rhythm that tells us that students want to hear more from us, you know, instead of hear less, but of higher quality and higher depth. But as you can see, I won't read this whole quote, but the board decided that their pathway to innovation was what? Design thinking methodology. So before I bring up Professor Hong, this is just a couple of books that really went into thinking about how we would approach this process. As I mentioned, I enrolled in the Design Thinking Certificate Program here at IUPUI, completed 6 credit hours thus far. I still have some more to go, I'm not finished. In order to adopt, you know, the ideation. But Tim Brown, this is a manifesto in design thinking around change by design. And so that was a really important book. Everybody knows Nathan Graw's work in terms of the enrollment cliffs that are upcoming, so that provided context. I put this book on here on leadership because it was published in 2011. And what happened directly before 2011? The Great Recession. So you have a series of really profound leadership essays coming out of a national dilemma, and then measure what matters. Okay, so how do you set goals? How do you measure what it is that you're doing? So with that, I'll pass the slide to Professor Hong.
Hello. Can you hear me? So, yeah, starting this conversation, how many of you heard about design thinking? Oh, many of them. What's your impression about that term? Do you mind sharing your perception about that term, design thinking? If you're familiar with that, what does it look like? What's your perception about that term?
It's very time consuming to do well.
Yeah, right. It is. Yeah, it is.
We used design thinking in our strategic planning 2 years ago.
You do.
Those meetings were long.
Right. Yes. I'm glad, to hear about that, because many times people misunderstand about design thinking as something short and playful activity. But yeah, it is a very rigorous process to understand, people and their context, right? So in that sense, yeah, if you Google design thinking, you might find a lot of definition, case studies, and process model. So we have this graduate program specialized in design research since 2007. So, yeah, in terms of defining what design thinking is, I can adopt many lenses, but considering this specific topic, I have a few concepts to share with you. So the first one is the mindset and engaging human problems. So yeah, it's not any kinds of subject matter. It is about human problems. In other words, there's certain aspect we cannot quantify. That's why you said it is time consuming, because there are a lot of the process involved to understand kind of some sort of interpreted concept. For instance, like how to recruit students. Like, are we okay to recruit students based on their the age, income level, vision? I mean, that kind of reference system is not working anymore, right? So I work with other sectors such as healthcare and technologies, etc. So this is quite eye-opening, hearing about the crisis of higher education from your point of view, because I have a very limited understanding about higher education crisis from a faculty point of view. In other words, when we start talking about design thinking in many sectors, there's a patterns. Like when we have a disruption, when we found that our reference systems aren't working anymore, it really kind of forces us to thinking about different way to understand human experience. That's what I'm talking about. Wickedness of the human experience is not, sometimes it's not quantifiable. For that reason, there's a great emphasis on qualitative aspect of design research / design thinking. So you heard about it, ethnographic methods like observation, the interview, those are very popular because we really try to understand, what's the root problem embedded in our everyday behaviors, right? So there's a huge emphasis on sense making in design research, like how to make things implicit, explicit. That's extremely important. So again, it is a time consuming, but again, we really need a different way to understand our students' experience because like I said, the way we have worked so far is not working. So the many sectors, including education, healthcare, kind of start embracing this way of thinking because it really kind of produces a different kind of output or different perspective to understand the human experience across the sectors. That is also, what I said also related to the concept of creative problem-solving process of skills and methods. If you know the problem, you don't need to really adopt this way of thinking. When we're using the word creativity, we're not talking about artistic expression, we're talking about something new, like creation, innovation. That's why if you Google design thinking, you will see innovation is another associated word. We need to really think about different way approaches this problem, and then what it is. So that's like the core essence of design thinking. And in our program, yes, there's again huge emphasis on process, and you might want to think about it like process is very generic terms, right? Everything involves a process. But when we're talking about process, there's we're talking about yes, the process involved this area. So ideating, prototyping, this is extremely important. In other words, when we have emphasis on quantitative data, there's a certain kind of understanding about the nature implementation. We're doing the rigorous research and collecting the findings and implement the solution. Design process is quite different. In other words, focusing on qualitative aspect of human experience, we're going through this process, prototyping. Sometimes we might call it rapid prototyping. In other words, we have a lot of concepts in our mind, but when we actually kind of putting into the tangible form, that works really well for all of us to see the same vision, again, it really kind of effective to facilitate our decision-making process. In that sense, when I'm talking about process, there is a great emphasis of iterateness. So you constantly prototyping the concept and test it out, and then communicate it, refining it, or sometimes, you come up with a different direction. So again, the point is, we really strong emphasis on forget about the rigidness or perfection of implementation. Implementing solution really requires the bi-directional communication between the service provider and service recipients. So that's what we're talking about, what is it, the core philosophy of design thinking process. It's about human-centered approaches. We can say that, we all of us working for our students is a human-centered, student-centered, but how are we doing it? There's a methodologies. How we decentering our perspectives and bring our students' perspective in the center of the process. It's not just a statement, there's a process of doing it. Communication design for collaborative innovation sounds very generic, but again, the problem, as Errol overview, is very complex, right? There are many stakeholders involved in this student experience. So how to facilitate that collective decision-making process across the units, we need strategical, methodical, communicative process to do so. This is one of the model we're using, but again, depending on your context, problem solving, it sounds it is a universal, right? A lot of disciplines say they are doing problem solving and there's a process involved. Design thinking process, yes, again, there's a principle embedded in that way of thinking, how to locate a student's perspective, in the center of the process and work, communicate across the discipline in a methodical manner. That's kind of like, I know this is very brief, but that's how I can explain about the design thinking process. So yes. Oh, I have a quote. Yeah. By approaching design as a forward thinking and collaborative problem solving, we can make a more empathetic and inclusive society. Yeah, the words are words, right? Sounds very generic, but again, I think this quote is really kind of capturing what are the primary principles embedded in design thinking process. Yes, instead of approaching design as a noun, that's agriculture understanding design making things. Instead of that, noun-based approaches, we really kind of leveraging our human capacity. How we're solving the problem every day and how to recognize the capacity, inviting those capacity in a collective design thinking, the problem solving process. So that's what we do, and I was really happy to hear Errol actually applying this way of thinking in his work. So we're going to explain how he did.
Yes. So the fun part, practitioner, the bridge between the faculty insights and the research into the practitioner experience. And I'm actually going to use this whiteboard, but a couple of things to say. You are right. Traditionally, applying a design thinking methodology is long. It can be. But this last year, our university leadership, contacted us and said, we need to turn things around. Hired a consultant in the summer of 2021, reviewed the results, and said, we need to do an all hands on deck, approach to enrollment planning. And you've got 3 months to come up with a plan. Yes. And being the achiever that I like to think myself to be, we said, okay, we're going to take this framework and we're going to accelerate it forward, but not at the expense of process. And so we'll talk about that here in a moment. So now, it's a lot of words, and I am going to read this because the framework that I'm going to introduce to you all today that got us from June of 2021 to present, right, is the ASO planning model. And it's the Analyze, Strategize, and Operationalize planning model. And it serves as a framework for facilitating high impact, short to midterm enrollment plans with a heightened level of fidelity. Keywords, short and midterm. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a middle level manager, okay? So when things happen at the top, okay, whether that's a long-term strategic plan that's 10 years out, or a 2 to 3 year plan, and that's meant to reimagine things, there's still a present day and tomorrow implementation that has to happen for all middle level managers. So this was created in order to align and corral the implementers at your institution in a way that successfully takes the ideologies and creates tactical activities that are tangible and that move you in the right direction, and also defines that. So successfully applied on the IUPUI campus this past academic year. This model has been in development the last 4 years and minted through integrating the IUPUI graduate program and design thinking framework into the work, and then continuing forward through mixed method holistic data analysis process that integrates real-time qualitative data from both customer and workforce mindsets. One of the key factors in accelerating our ability to move forward with decision making and move past the long roadways was collecting employee insights, treating employees like ethnographers, because they are. They have been there at the forefront, observing students in their own right, and collecting those perspectives and insights, coding that data, and then reconnecting it back to your traditional data set of external and internal data, provided a new level of depth and precision that allowed us to to create immediate decision points in terms of where we would be investing our time, but also where we would not be investing our time. Moving forward, this planning framework affords the enrollment designer a level of precision in determining external and internal shaping focus to thus focus efforts in alignment with the workforce dependent upon fulfilling efforts. This parts from traditional strategic planning and enters in the realm of enrollment design by employing a qualitative coding methodology from the insights of the employee base. The new outputs are then connected to the traditional sources of both quantitative and qualitative outputs, thus providing a new depth and decision-making power for leadership. The result, your highest impact enrollment practices always, and a professional context that breeds empowerment and success for your workforce by constantly re-curating the plan as you go. All right, so let's hop in. So you got three areas. You have analyze, you have strategize, and then you have operationalize, ASO. So on the analyze part, nothing new that you all don't already know. All right, so we're gonna look at national data sets. Like, for example, this came from the survey I've been citing throughout my presentation, preferred campus features. We're gonna look at institutional data sets. This is from our colleagues in our institutional research and decision support. And this is our entering student survey that tells us particularly decisions of why students chose to attend IUPUI. And then you've got funnel data, okay? So for those that don't know the term, funnel is, from the top, you have your leads and your prospects all the way down to the enrolled student. So looking at the quantitative and qualitative side of that. And in our world, we spend a lot of time connecting dots, right? But when you're looking at traditional strategic enrollment planning, okay, so much of that trend data is valuable when you're planning 10 years, 5 years out, and it's still valuable for the short term, but we need something to complement that. I need something to complement that as a director of admissions. So in terms of the strategize piece, as I mentioned, the X factor, it was the workforce output. Why did we choose to go to the workforce output? One, we were losing staff members left and right. We needed to figure out how to involve them in the process. But the other piece is that at an institution that's decentralized, especially in higher education, our faculty are key. Our faculty are leaders in this space. So we needed all of those who had a vested interest to be involved in it so that there would be a buy-in to the plan at hand. So we hosted roundtable discussions that included faculty and staff that talked about the problems that we wanted that we could solve. We also know that the data interpretation was done through a subjective user experience output. So every person, a faculty member, has one experience with students versus the admissions counselor, versus the financial aid person, versus the high-level administrator, and that's okay in this particular process. Because we collected all of that data, and employed a qualitative methodology in order to translate that into particular codes, and then revisit our wide body of data, the quantitative and the qualitative traditional data, and begin to connecting dots. And then from there, bringing up a plan to executive leadership to react to and to respond to. The other piece is a capabilities assessment once we get to that point. Viability, so every time, any strategy theme that we commit to, you have to ask, can it be sustained for long-term growth? Doesn't matter if we decide to choose something right now in order to put a Band-Aid on it, if we're wasting time and resources to go ahead and cover a short-term problem. Feasibility, do we have the capacity, tools, and know-how to do it? And then desirability, does it fit in our mission, and can we embrace it as an institution? The capabilities assessment definition is going to depend on institution. That's really important to keep in mind. And that's the beauty of the design thinking process, is that it's going to be different depending on the culture, depending on the goal and the vision of your institution. And then it makes it easier to link strategic design to resource allocation. And then lastly, the execution. So the centralization of enrollment, ensuring that there's both vertical and horizontal alignment, right? So if there's not vertical alignment, then you've got a plan that's in place. And if you're at a decentralized university or context, your enrollment stakeholders will say, well, my numbers are fluctuating and my leadership is telling me I need to do more, I need to do more, I need to do more, right? But if you get that buy-in from the top and then across the board, then there's a synergy around what was co-created together. Because why? There was an involvement of your entire workforce in giving their input to where we needed to do our effort, or assert our efforts in relation to our enrollment effort, our enrollment management optimization work. Define low-hanging fruit, things that could earn some quick wins as well, so that you can build that momentum. And then timeline, how we'll share out progress and success, and then establish a structure for ongoing audit of the plan. That last piece, the understanding that the plan is not a static entity. We've done it, we're good to go. You're constantly collecting the mindset data of your student base. You're constantly collecting the mindset data of those that are in your market. You're constantly, taking that information and making decisions from an intervention-based standpoint to what you have in place. So it's not a static entity. It's an organic, constantly evolving in your short to midterm plan. As I mentioned before, we saw a 17.5% decrease in beginners, 5% decrease in 2021 in terms of our institution. And so when that June 2021 call to action came with our consultant that came in, and we applied this, we ended the year at 1%. Now 1% at net, I want to be very clear, that's still not up in terms of net, but it did meet the goal of increasing our enrollment more than where we were before. But it's also a recognition of the long term. So I share with my leadership, this is a 24-month process, because you're talking about a cultural change. Building from the ground up, and then feeding your leadership with feedback and information is something that is not as common, in higher education. Now, you may have different entities that resemble it, but the design thinking piece puts a lot of weight on everybody's perspective within your organization, respectively as ethnographers. So the case study that we talked about, again, I'm showing you different models. We really led with what's called a content-first design, where our leadership let us know what the business goals were. They said, look, we looked at the data, we looked at the funnel, and we are seeing our greatest opportunity in the spring, which is considered yield season. Those are the individuals that have been admitted. We looked at the past and we saw that we were seeing high attrition in that period. What's happening? Right? What are the things that are within our control, and what are the needs of the students, within this particular problem space? And then we went into the creation of the strategy plan for the content, strategy plan for content, and then we built the prototype of the plan as well, which defined strategy themes, refunneled it back to our base to then define activities that made sense, and then put it back up to our leads in terms of our enrollment planning, insights team, to then take it up to the executive leadership to make decisions about capabilities and connect it to the budget and mint it thereafter. Yes?
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
So, when I've done design thinking and in a course on this, I found that one of the most challenging things was actually defining the issue and defining the problem. And the more you look at it collaboratively and through lots of different lenses, the more you refine it. So enrollment on its face seemed easy, right? Like, get more people to come here. But did you find that you were changing your problem statement and the things that you really could affect, or were you better understanding the reasons that students want to come to your particular institution as you engage in this design thinking process?
Yeah, I can answer. Do you want to say anything before I hop in?
I can have a question for you.
Sure.
What was the process? Did you guys come up with one problem statement, or how was your process in terms of diversion of conversations?
It's a great question. We were working for a real client, Boston Project Workforce, but we were trying to better understand them. It was really interesting because we were external to their operation,
Right.
and so we thought we knew what their problem was, but at every step, we needed to talk to more people and do more research to clarify what part of it we could solve. Because it was too big for us to solve all of it. So that's what I mean by refining and getting to a target that was realistic in our time frame. So I guess that's where my question's coming from.
Yeah, great question. So I will answer it by going here, and I'll talk a little bit about what our approach was. So I've got Colin Powell up here, and he has a rule called the 40-70 rule, which was really important for us to integrate into the culture of our planning exercise for the campus. We had 3 months to come up with a plan that was going to reverse that enrollment drop. And as it was stated before, design thinking can take a very long time, so we had to move in an accelerated fashion. So in October of 2021, so before I move into that, the 47 rule states that you need between 40 and 70% of total information to make a decision, okay? With less than 40%, you'll likely make a poor choice. With more, you'll end up taking too long, and the decision will be made for you. To your point about the problem statement, this was really huge for us to be able to move forward and say to our stakeholders, we're going to constantly be revisiting this, right? This is going to continue to evolve as we get more data, as we get more information. So, but we have enough within that boundary for us to make a call and then go from there. Now, the problem domain was clear to us. It was yield within spring, so we spent all of our time thinking about that particular domain.
In spring.
Yes.
So you focused on that particular.
Correct, for the purposes of what it is that we were trying to achieve, all right?
Yeah,
So-
if I can add one more thing, it's like, that's the point, we strongly emphasize on, the communicative aspect. Because depending on your role, right, sometimes people understand the problem from a very tactical point of view versus a strategical point of view. And there's a whole continuum between strategical and tactical. Meanings, we usually diverge, what are the potential problems, across the perspectives, and we're mapping it out, and then let people understand their perspective, where it stands from that, continuum. And again, we cannot solve all the problems at the same time. Let people understand what is their strategical decision within a specific time frame by choosing a specific time, the problem statement. That's why it's not just, a refinement of the problem statement to me, is for helping people understand, like, that continuum, the complexity of
Yeah,
the
you'll
problems.
constantly be refining, you'll constantly be iterating.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, the data canvassing and individual evaluation, as we mentioned, collecting all of that data, and as we're getting ready to go into October, so follow me on the timeline. So we've already committed to this process 3 months. October, we have to get in front of an audience of over 300 faculty and staff and say, all hands on deck, enrollment planning. So, number one, partnering with our assessment and learning professionals. So our institutional research and decision support team, huge friends of us. If anybody knows Michelle Hansen, great person. So collecting quantitative and qualitative data from across a variety, various sources, and then making that data accessible to all after curating it so that they can just ingest it. We're not asking them to analyze it in great deal or connect dots, just expose yourself to it. And then in that October, we went into the strategized space to collect our next most important source of data, which was to complement what it was, which was our workforce insights. So we had over 200 faculty and staff that were present, and all of our individual schools, as well as our staff, ended up having roundtable discussions. And in those roundtable discussions, we provided questions, we defined the problem domain, and we asked them to send up to us executive summaries. We ended up having 350 submitted lines of code from that process. And from that, we were able to see that there were particular themes that emerged and rose to the top based off of these ethnographic insights. Again, recognizing that the workforce, the base, are seeing students on a regular basis, or they may be seeing backstage processes. But if nothing else, the pandemic has inspired a more focused attention by these individuals. But on our campus, because in order for us to align the campus, which was another big part of our enrollment management strategy, we needed the campus to see themselves in the strategy. We've done in the past going behind closed doors, creating a strategy, having kind of nominal, some ceremonial engagement of our faculty and staff, and then when the numbers fluctuate, people diverge and they make decisions on their own. Not because they're bad people, it's depending on how decentralized you are, it's about trying to move in a particular direction. But we saw from this data, and we saw from our internal data, that there was just a lot of what we consider white noise, a lot of movement in the student experience, just like what you saw earlier with the email. The final evaluation is in combination with the original data, as I mentioned, and is reviewed by an industry insights team, which consists of our data analysts, as well as our enrollment management team. And then priorities are then recommended for, in terms of recruitment populations, and then strategy themes are then finalized, looking at the totality of this holistic data set in terms of connecting the particular dots and represent it out to the community. What we found when we did this, and to just give you an example of what emerged, we had 3 main strategy theme buckets. Okay, there were recruitment and counseling, campus visits and events, and then it was marketing and communications. And under each, we had 5 themes that emerged, okay, under each one. In addition to those themes, we were then able to add some, omit others based off of the national, regional, and institutional data that was on hand, and that team came together and connected those dots. So this is where these emergent strategy themes came about. Continuing forward, respectful time. The roundtable groups then, after it's been approved, received these themes back, okay? And they were then charged with defining work activities. Why is this important in the Great Resignation, okay? So not only is the workforce now participating in designing where they're affecting their efforts, okay? But you're also completing the process while still honoring the role that leadership plays. And so they're seeing the students on an ongoing basis, and they're able to say, here are some activities that we think are high impact practices, and then send it back up to us in terms of the 8 insights teams to then approve, deny, and begin connecting it to the budget, right? So what do we actually have in order to achieve this? So the final cycle plan is then shared with cabinet leadership for the final capabilities assessment across all university funded areas, okay? Do we get more money for this endeavor? Do we get exactly what we have, or do we have less? And then you have the final approval. From there, you have to implement with the operationalize. So we have established an ongoing space for evaluating the existing plan for intervention-based decisions. We connect the stakeholders to spaces for updates on an ongoing basis. We ensure consistency of message around the plan, both vertically and horizontally in the organization. Repetition was a big deal because you're talking about a culture change. And then finally, establish a timeline of execution of the process and encourage everyone to trust the design. This is an example of what the spring looked like in terms of our engagement, vertically and horizontally. So you see deans and cabinet are at the top, and then you have here our council, which are the executors, the leaders that are not managing individuals here. And we mapped out a timeline based off of the strategy themes that were created and designed. And everybody was speaking the same language. Everybody is now focused on the same things. So the results from this was that we did establish more precision in our data to inform strategic decision making around the recruitment experience. We now knew that not only based off of the external market of what students wanted, but what we got from the workforce insight was also an evaluation of where we needed to adjust our internal processes, right? Because when you go from in-person to virtual, now you have to get your university technology team to make adjustments, or there's policies that weren't really thought about, or your CRM has to function in a different way. By getting your university employees involved, you're now uncovering some of the barriers that will help you optimize your enrollment, and the efficiency then emerge. Increased analysis, depth, and decision making as well. So you have, as we've been talking about, those insights, adding a new level of depth. There's already depth of what we've been doing. We just need to go a step further. And then the buy-in, to the recursive cycles of prototyping. We went through 2 prototyping cycles. We did one in the fall, and we did another one in the summer, and the entire campus was involved in it. And then finally, inspire more and engage workforce with meaningful collaboration across faculty and staff lines. This is why I am presenting with Professor Hong, because it's important to see a staff and a faculty connection when doing this kind of work, because those are 2 different audiences. Those are 2 different cultures, and bringing them together to align is critically important. But the inspiration in terms of staff retention will lead to leaning on your people and going up. So I'm going to end by reading this at the end of our process by one of our stakeholders that was involved. And it says, although I could say great, and this was an email to myself and my colleague that led this particular process into a 1% increase. And it says, although I could say great things about many parts of your leadership, I want to specifically acknowledge all the efforts you have put into gathering and implementing feedback from campus partners, including myself. It has been so refreshing to see the feedback acted on in the next recruitment cycle, as the next recruitment cycle kicks off, in ways such as making planned communication more available, sharing details about recruitment travel, communicating timelines and deadlines well in advance. Rarely have I seen such feedback so thoroughly addressed. I know the efforts to implement that feedback are not insignificant. I'm grateful for the leadership you both provided, for your team's efforts to not just do great work, but make it a good process along the way for everyone involved. This speaks volumes about the value you place on partnership and collaboration. And I can tell you, as we go to the last steps, I can tell you that getting this message and receiving that verbally as well was an affirmation in these times where people are fleeing our industry, especially the enrollment world, where there's so much pressure, that having one's voice heard and involved in the process can speak volumes, not only for the staff retention, but also the fidelity of your data analysis process. So moving forward, I want to stress that you got to ensure that you have vertical and horizontal buy-in. The examples that I gave in terms of design thinking in those universities, those are presidents, right? They are the top, right? And you've got your boards, but there has to be an embrace of that. And it is not the innovation model, it is a innovation model. Consider scaling the model up as well to the top of your leadership organization. So it's one thing to have, so from my sense, I'm a director of admissions. We pushed this information up, we went through this process, everybody was involved, but it was only focused on beginners. So you get the output at the end and give it to your leadership. You don't put them in a position of success, if they don't have a similar output from your retention side, from your technology side, from your faculty side. So big vision is, how do you get, like Arizona State, a university, to say we want similar outputs coming to the top so we can then appropriate funds accordingly. Research your enrollment insights team to be able to keep up to date with industry trends and to serve as a filter for final decision points by university leadership. The role that I played this last year as a part of that team, I'm constantly reading articles, I'm constantly reading books, I'm in professional associations, I'm a part of the largest public university admissions organization in the nation. And I'm bringing that information back, so when I look at all of the data, I'm using intuition to say, you know what, let's run with this, let's keep this, and talking with other colleagues that are taking other areas. And then acknowledge that precision that comes with the mixed method analysis and defining nuances within the strategy for your stakeholder base. Okay, with that being said, I want to thank you all for coming today. And again, if not now, please, I'm on LinkedIn if you want to find me. I would love to get, given the work that you all do, any feedback in terms of what's missing from this. And I will be posting this slide deck, but I'm excited about it. I believe in it. I will be finishing the program this year, or in 2023. I took a pause for a semester because I should get college credit for this. Okay, all right.
Your practicum is done.
My practicum is done? Okay, all right. But I'll be finishing at the end of 2023. But I thank you all for taking the time to listen. And as Jon Snow said from Game of Thrones, you know nothing, Jon Snow. And I love this process because I know nothing. And I'm here to just understand. Thank you all. Any questions?
Could you maybe share a tangible example of like a theme that emerged from all those collaborative conversations that maybe you had that included faculty, and then how you then took that information about that theme and then acted on it in the admissions side?
Absolutely. So let's say on the recruitment and counseling domain, under it was individualized counseling, right? So the value of individualized counseling with our external data, but then also internally based off of our staff saying, we're seeing a high demand and we can't keep up, right? So that required us to say, okay, so where does this fall prioritization wise? So there was a prioritization exercise. And what are we willing to start, stop, and continue? Which is not something we do very well in higher education. We tend to add things, but not stop things or pause things. In terms of getting the faculty and the staff involved across campus, a lot of it is around trusting the process because we are so decentralized. But in the repetition in terms of communicating, showcasing the data in terms of how much demand that we have, talking about getting them adept to seeing the student mindset data and collecting that as we go along. But I found myself this last year constantly reminding everybody that the themes that emerged, that it didn't come from us. It came from you all. Like, you all created this plan. And there was a sense of ownership that I had never seen prior to my time here that the campus community had. Now, I will say that the adoption of this process, okay, it has to be universal across the board, because you do still have some individuals that do recruit for different schools that will come up to me and say, Errol, I want to go all in on this area. I see the data, but our numbers are fluctuating, and my leadership is saying we need you to travel more, we need you to do more, we need you to do more. So this is why I brought the president examples up, because it's really the influencers that have the ear of the presidents are the ones that are going to have to say, we've got to think about how we approach short and midterm planning, because your middle level managers are leaving and abandoning ship because there's so much pressure to figure out how to take all of the things that come down from these long strategic plans and translate it in that regard. So that was an example. We have several others, and I have actually an entire document that I've created to, the capture the 15.
But in that instance, when you say individualized attention, you mean individualized attention that the prospective students were wanting?
Great question.
Or that I'm just trying to understand what you mean by individualized attention in that context.
Yeah. Individualized counseling. So one-on-one scheduled counseling. So, and it allowed us to think about not just offering it, but what are the things that we need? So we know that mental health is a main factor, affordability is a main factor, right? We also know that, there is a desire to facilitate a sense of belonging. So taking those elements and now saying, instead of us just achieving quantity, we have the depth of information. Let's shape this experience so that we reimagine the quality to the reality of where our students.
Thanks. That example helps.
Okay, good.